Hello everyone, welcome to part 4 in our Smart Towns Everything You Need to Know series. Today's session is all about changing data into decisions and action. Just to make you all aware, due to unforeseen circumstances, our speaker Gary wasn't able to attend today's session, but luckily for us, we were able to find Paul, who is going to step in and cover today's session. So the session will be on the same topic, still changing data into action, but Paul Santon will be delivering that for us. And hopefully we'll get Gary back to deliver his sort of session in the new year. So just before we get started, I know there are some kind of familiar faces who have been on the series every week, but there are a couple of new faces. So I will just give you a little bit of an overview about our Smart Towns project. So I'm Holly, the Regional Project Manager for Smart Towns Wales, primarily responsible for the Mid and West regions of Wales. Within the Smart Towns team, though, we are a team of 3, and we've got our overarching project manager, Kiki, who's covering sort of the mid, south, east of Wales. And additionally, we have Rian, our digital officer, who is responsible for the northern regions. But being a small team, we work very closely together. So I have no doubt you'll come across us all as time goes on. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to approach any one of us, as we'd be more than happy to answer any questions or help you as best we can. So what is a smart town? A smart town we describe as a town that leverages information, often referred to as data, from various sources such as sensors and town Wi-Fi systems to inform decisions and enhance efficiency. So today is a very sort of apt workshop, and it's showing you how to turn data from those sort of smart devices into actual decisions. As for the Smart Towns Wales project, we are a Welsh Government funded project dedicated to supporting towns, businesses and communities across Wales with the power of smart solutions. Aligned with the Transforming Towns agenda, we aim to support communities across Wales in embracing and harnessing this technology being rolled out. Our support comes in 4 main areas, as you can kind of see on screen there, which includes webinars, workshops, and networking events, so sessions like today. But we're also able to offer specific sessions. So if you want us to run something for your community, like an introduction to smart towns, or you've got a specific bit of tech and you'd like to run a session on how to utilize it, then we'd be more than open to your feedback. We'd like to think we're quite a flexible service, so do get in touch. And we also take great pride in highlighting the remarkable achievements of towns across Wales. So we'd love to share, any success stories or case studies or pilot projects that you might be running. So if you have any good news we can share, please do let us know. And we also have a range of great tools and resources available on our website. So if you're not connected to us on social media as well, please do follow us on there. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, so you can kind of keep informed of our latest news and what's happening. So let me stop sharing my screen. Well, I can leave that up actually while I run through the housekeeping parts. So today's workshop, as I've mentioned, is all about changing data into action, which is where you really start seeing those benefits of your smart town solutions. This session will be delivered by Paul Santon, one of the co-founders of CodaGarden and the team behind the platform Patrum, which is all about helping smart towns utilize their smart solutions by presenting that data in an open access platform. So you're in very, very safe hands with Paul today. Please do pick his brains and ask him any questions you may have. Just to let you know, we will be hosting a workshop specifically on Patrum next week, but I'll talk to you more about that at the end of the workshop today. And before I hand you over, just to go over a couple of housekeeping points. If you have any questions through the workshop, as usual, please do pop those in the chat box, more the better, and we'll run through them at the end of the session. during the Q&A. And just to let you know, the session, as Kiki mentioned, will be recorded. So don't worry about scribbling anything down. We will make sure, as we have every other week, you get all of the session recordings after today. Please also keep yourselves on mute just to avoid any distractions while Paul is talking. So now I will try to stop sharing screen again. Sorry for your technical difficulties. There we are. And I will hand you over to Paul. No worries. Yeah, and we can see those slides. Great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Holly. Thanks, Kiki. Right. Okay. First of all, we'll go over what we're hoping to cover in this presentation. I want to stress from the outset, although Holly's told you to say mute, if you have questions or you think you need to add something to it, we're here to listen as much as so it's not just Q&A at the end. Please jump in with comments or questions, or where, as anyone who knows me, I'd go rambling off down some cul-de-sac somewhere. So what we're going to cover, a quick introduction to us, and then we're going to go over some of the basics first. The first is the data, information, what we're going to select to measure, then the broad concept of visualizing information. We'll then look at dashboards, a selection of dashboards that are available to you and either already in use or easy to implement. We'll cover the idea of data sharing and downloading data, how to actually manipulate that data into something that is meaningful, and then ultimately, once we've got that data graphed, how we can use that to make decisions, and more importantly then monitor the outcome of those decisions. Yeah. Okay, so off to the intro. Yeah, we're Codegarten. We are now in our 5th year. There's 9 of us based around North Wales. We work with the lovely Menter Môn, Cyngor Powys, Adra, which is North Wales' largest housing association, Cyngor Gwynedd, Cyngor Sir Fôn, Department for Transport and KPMG, and we do others, but those are probably the names that some people will recognise. What do? We work across public transport with the Department for Transport and KPMG and Powys. We work on school transport, smart homes, local e-commerce, and probably far more relevant to where we're going in this presentation, we work on smart places. One of the things that underpins everything we do is that the data is open wherever it's legally permissible. That our code is open am a pob dim and dwyieithog. So when we design something and deploy it, it works in both languages from the outset. So enough of us. Okay, the fundamentals. Here we've got some data that's come from a sensor. You can see on the left-hand side, there's some geeky gibberish there that says attributes and payloads, and then we've got some human-friendly interpretations, because that's not how we receive it, that indicates its humidity, light, motion, temperature, and I'm convinced the last one's the battery level, but I can never remember. So this is sensor data. This is what it looks like in all its naked goodness. It's basically a collection of numbers. And what we want to get across here from the outset is data is fundamentally different to information. It's raw, it's unanalyzed, it has no context, it's just there. So temperature 19.7, great. What does 19.7 mean? And that's where we get to information. How do we make that data that comes from sensors into something that informs us? Yeah, this is the difference. How can we take that 19.7 and miraculously turn it into something that says 19.7 degrees centigrade? All of a sudden, we now know roughly in our own minds what that means. Yeah. So information, it's important. The difference isn't nuanced. We're going to be making decisions based on information, but the most important thing here is that information can only actually be available to us. It's only created through data. Yeah. So what we're going to be talking about predominantly, even if we use the word data, is information. Um, and the main purpose of the information we're going to be talking about is how to make decisions. And the way that we make decisions is we communicate that information either via reports, via shared files, that's the old-fashioned way, or via dashboards where we can start to control access and enable people to look at the same thing at the same time. So, data in a Welsh town. We're going to limit this to Wales, even though this is applicable, I would imagine, even somewhere in the northern wastes of Canada, or as we work in it's applicable in northern Brazil. So, what can we capture? That's it's fundamental, and we. This is an entirely subjective opinion. We break in terms of towns. We break the data that we capture and collect into two key types. The first one is environmental data, and that can include a range of metrics that are called air quality. That can be particulates, which is typically pollution from exhausts or tire dust. And there's two different types of that. There's the various evil nitrogen oxides. That's why it's got an X on it, because there's at least three of them that I'm aware of. We've got sulfur dioxide, and then we've got non-methane based volatile organic compounds. I'm very glad that many, many decades ago I did an A level in chemistry, because I think I just about understand what that is. So those are the kind of things that we can measure using sensors that can help us to then produce information on air quality. Temperature we've just covered, so we can easily record temperature. Humidity and rainfall are actually different. Humidity is the amount of moisture in the air. Rainfall is what we get in Wales. So we can record that environmental data. Sunshine is another metric, which we can record the amount of daylight. We can record wind. And several of those could all be rolled together and to inform us as to what was the weather in that place. Other things that we can measure are sound levels or the noise. Please note that when we say we're recording sound levels, we are not actually recording, say, this conversation. We're recording the level of the sound of a lorry going past or a raucous bar. So that's what it is. And we can also extend that to things like monitoring the level of rivers. And even as we're doing in northern Brazil, we can measure the flow of the river. All we need is a stable riverbed to look at. And finally, something I'll cover very briefly, but it's another sensor, it's another kind of data, is we can measure the vibrations in the earth. I'll bore you with that in a bit. So that's environmental data. If you think there's any other metrics in there that might help inform us and help us make decisions, then please tell us, because it's not definitive. The other one, which is probably sometimes more interesting, but is intrinsically linked to environmental, is the data that we can collect on human activity. And this is a bit more disparate. So the key one, the elephant in the room for us is obviously counting footfall on the high street, and also as an output of that, the length of time that people might stay in a place, what we call the dwell time. We can also measure the volume of traffic, not necessarily the actual right down to the 348 cars went past here, but we can indicate volume, so we can say that there might be a specific peak in a place for the primary school run. An important metric which we don't have available to us, but we're very keen to have is, and it's human activity, is what does that high street comprise of? How many hairdressing salons, bookshops, butchers, etc. What kind of businesses? Food businesses. So the data that we've been able to find is pretty much at a planning level. So that's an important piece of data. One that we'd be sharing with you, which I think really does inform decision making, is the qualitative data, the data we're actually capturing directly from people. So a good example there is where people are asked to log into Wi-Fi networks, that there's a series of questions that they can be asked. Sentiment reporting is where you can look for a quick response from a location as to if somebody's likes the place. It can be done in a number of ways, but again, it's qualitative. Other qualitative methods are if you're collecting email addresses, you can actually start to understand what the response rates are for all those email marketing campaigns. It's a form of data on human activity to do with that place. One that is absolutely obvious, but something that won't be available to us, but it is to the decision makers in the community, is the traditional measure of human activity in a place, which is sales. What are the revenues of those business? That will come from either their point of sale systems or their accounting systems. But it's a vital measure on the health and that human activity in there. Ones that are already there that we are working with are where town councils, local authorities, or shopping centres, they quite often have data feeds which show how many car parking spaces are available. And that's the function we're traditionally used to seeing. We drive into a town and we see that there are 24 parking spaces available. So we know it's going to be tight. And that's information that we receive that's helpful to us as individuals. What we see this data as is, as long as we know that there's 385 spaces in that car park and we have a feed of the availability, we can start to then show decision makers, or you can get it as well, not we, that the levels of usage of that car park over time. Yeah, which is a fantastic metric of human activity in a place. Slightly more arcane, but it's being rolled out, is bin sensors. Again, it's a data source, but it's not really environmental. It's a data that is an outcome of human activity. And we'll look at that. More publicly available data sets are things like public transport usage. So TfW, for instance, is able in some ways to be able to provide us with ticket sales and where people get on buses. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to say where you get off a bus or a train, but it's much easier to determine where you've been on. And one that shouldn't be discounted is that many places will have attractions. Sometimes due to funding, etc., you can also have attraction visitor numbers as a data source that can help us understand what is happening or has happened in a place. So how do we capture this data? There's some examples there. There's a sensor that measures the distance. So it's a LoRaWAN sensor. And then on the picture on the right, lurking underneath the Christmas lights, there is a Wi-Fi access point and some other network equipment that can also help us measure. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a method of being able to capture the data, which is a Wi-Fi login splash page, which in this case is page one. There are several other pages. Well, there's another page. So that sorts out the legals, consent, etc., and links to terms and conditions. But afterwards, it then presents a very simple questionnaire, which we'll be able to see the outcomes of that. So we're trying to say we've got IoT sensors. In one case, we've got Wi-Fi or networking, which is indirectly measuring as an output of its principal service. And then we've got digital surveys that can be applied consistently across many places. So to run through the different types in a bit more detail and to cover some of these terms just so we're aware of them. When we're talking about digital sensors, the predominant one from our experience that's applicable in Wales are LoRaWAN sensors. Please worry not. I am not going to go into great details about LoRaWAN. Suffice to say that Wales is actually a world-beating nation with LoRaWAN. We're right up there at the top. Its coverage is continuing to grow. It's pretty much free to use. It's reliable, and the sensors that use it are the support requirements are much lower. So it's an important technology. Other digital sensor types can be either the Wi-Fi devices themselves or sensors that connect via Wi-Fi. Sometimes a little bit more difficult to support, but in particular cases where you are collecting a lot of data, then Wi-Fi or wired with a network cable is the way to go. I've put remote in as well because sometimes you might want to measure something which is related to the town, but there is no connectivity, and you can still do that. So, for instance, if a town, a good example here is Llangefni, where maybe I'm going to be a thin ice here, but the principal tourist attraction or the principal attraction in Llangefni isn't in Llangefni. I think that's fair to say. I'm not going to ask anyone to quote me back on that, but that's what we're talking about when we're remote. It could be that there's no method to actually get the data in real time, and you have to go and collect it. So it's remote. Digital surveys, the development of we've discussed Wi-Fi logins, town sentiment QR codes, e-marketing, and external data sources. It doesn't all have to be done by yourself. It can be done by communities. It can be small scale, and there are sites that we contribute. So there's a global site called sensors.community, which supports a variety of sensors. You can build them yourselves. You can put them in there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a top-down approach. Sometimes it can be bottom up. We've covered the external things like local authorities and Transport for Wales. Right. What kinds of sensors are there? When we're saying that, what can we actually measure? And then how can we bring that into something that means something to us in terms of information? So I've covered Wi-Fi. I haven't covered Bluetooth. Bluetooth, we use to connect our phone to our car and maybe a portable speaker. It can be used to measure the number of people in a bus. We don't need them to have Bluetooth switched on. We can literally tell how many people are in a bus by how much of the signal is absorbed. So Bluetooth can be used to measure things. It could be occupancy in a room. It doesn't need devices. It's quite reliable, and it's available. It's still kind of quite new. Pulse. It's got nothing to do with health. I'm glad to say it's actually to do with those old-fashioned things that you see on the roads where people had maybe put a new bypass in, those black rubber strips that go across the road. What happens when a vehicle goes over them is it creates a pulse, a charge. And they used to cost a lot of money to run in the old days. Now you can put a very cheap LoRaWAN sensor on the end of that strip and it will count the pulses. So if that's counting vehicles going over or whatever else, you can count things with what's called a pulse sensor. We've talked about gases. There's a wide range of those. They're still quite expensive. Particulates you can buy off the shelf. They measure typically just two sizes of particulates, and you can build your own, which is what we do with ours. Beams are again something where when a beam is broken, you can measure that. It's a bit problematic if you're trying to use that to count people or vehicles because you don't know which way they're going, but you're still counting something. It measures it. Pressure, um, uh, difficult to find examples for the context of smart towns, but I'm hoping somebody can. We use these to measure how empty a gas canister is on a remote island called an Essentially. So that's an example of that. It's typically used in health settings for people sitting down in bed, etc. But then I'm certain there will be uses. It could be something to do with bins, but we doubt it. Distance, all sorts of uses for distance from inside a bin. There are many uses and they're ubiquitous. There's lots of them. Expensive sensor type is LiDAR, where you can use that to count vehicles or other things. You've also got cameras, and I think it's important just to stress with cameras, there are really two kinds of cameras. There are the cameras that we all expect, the ones where we've got the terrifying face recognition or CCTV, the Big Brother systems, and they're obviously there and they are a sensor, they're capturing data. But the ones that we use are, well, they're permanently out of focus. It's like my world without my glasses on. And they're that in that way in order to facilitate privacy. So they're looking more at shapes and movement. And we use those to count traffic as a good example there, where it can pick up the shape of a vehicle going past. It's getting a bit fruity now with seismic, but we do use systems that can measure the vibrations in the ground to tell us about what is happening in a town. And I'll show you how that happens. Moisture, it can be in the air or it can be in your hanging basket. We don't care. they're slightly different sensors, but you can use moisture sensors for all sorts of things. Sound levels are um, really to do they're directly there to record the level of sound. We've covered that. Contact, it's for when things open and close. So typically it's used for doors and windows, but more importantly, it can be used for things like gates where people are going in and out of something. So it could be what we'd really call hyperlocal, where you might want to look at usage of a playground. So sometimes these things aren't necessarily to do with the business, they're to do with the community. And infrared, there are many uses, particularly for detecting the presence of people or whatever. But that's just a small example of the low cost, typically low cost, with the exception of LiDAR types of sensors that are available to us. Right, so that's hopefully a preamble to try and give us a baseline of data information and the types of sensors, what we're able to capture in terms of data. The most important thing here, though, is that it's these elements have to be taken fully into account. Is the data fit for purpose? So an example there would be putting a temperature sensor right next to an air conditioning output. Yeah. Straight away, we know now that that data isn't fit for purpose because we will be recording temperatures which do not reflect what happens in that place. Is it accurate? We're talking about low cost sensors. So the levels of accuracy, we've got to be slightly more comfortable with the fact that if we had a £35,000 weather station, it might say that the temperature is 16.8, but our £1,500 weather station might tell us that it's 17 degrees. Yeah, it's going to be slightly different, but it's still enough information to support decisions. Consistency. This is very important when you start to see this as something that enables you to make decisions in light of your peers. So you've got to understand, you've got to have some confidence that if you're looking at weather data in Treorchy and you're looking at weather data in Mumbles, that that both of them reflect a very similar version of what they're seeing, that they're not radically different devices. It's got to be consistent. Truthful's an ambiguous one, but it's really important. When we count footfall, we're not counting footfall, we're counting the number of devices. Plus that, we're counting a subset of the number of devices. So we're not saying that there's a 1,200 people there, but what we are saying is that if we've detected 600 devices at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you see that there are 1,200 devices at lunchtime, that what is truthful is that that place is twice as busy as it was there. And it's not a random number, it's just it's not a total count. Timeliness is something that's difficult to achieve, and it's taken us 3 years. And I think that some of the systems that we're able to show you are able to do this. There are two sides to this. There is what is happening now, and then what's happened in the past. And doing the two is actually a challenge because quite often we work in the concept of a day. And how can you give a timely answer as to what's happening today when the day isn't finished? So there are some conundrums that you have to work with there. But there are two types. There is the what's happening now. It's not going to reflect at the end of the day the totality of it, but it does give you that indication of the traffic volumes are really high, and it's important. GDPR compliance is absolutely essential. The majority of the sensors that we're talking about are GDPR compliant, but things like monitoring Wi-Fi, you have to make sure that you're compliant, and there's a number of issues there. And security is paramount. Unfortunately, when it comes to the Internet of Things and sensors, people tend, because they're not capturing anything important, they're just capturing the amount of moisture in a flowering basket or how full a bin is. So that sometimes security isn't properly implemented, or it could be improved. Of course, there is very little damage that can be done by hacking into a flower hanging basket sensor. But the key point here is that they will link back to systems elsewhere. and it's an easy way in, or potentially an easy way in to do it. So security is important, and it's not just the technical security as well. It's the physical security of the devices. Where do you locate them so that people, and bizarrely, towns are actually much, much, much easier to manage than deeply rural locations, where we've seen things literally ripped up within an hour of installation. So towns don't, we've never really seen that problem in towns over 5 years. Right, apologies, but the most important bit is location, location, location. Um, we've got these sensors. Um, we put them in, or we are guided by people to put them in locations, but are they actually measuring what you want to make decisions on, the area that you want to make decisions on? If it was Wi-Fi, do they measure the activity across the whole of the central business district or the high street? Or are there just random locations which can give a clue but don't actually record activity across that whole space? Another key element there is things like particulate sensors. If you are going to locate your first particulate sensors as per guidance at a height of 2 meters and at least 3 meters away from the road, you've got to make sure that all your other particulate sensors, if you are working across multiple locations at multiple towns, you need to try and ensure that any of the other sensors of that type are in the same kind of location. Nobody's going to test you. There's no absolutely correct answer here, but in our experience, you've got to measure like with like. Another important thing here is, particularly when, in our case, we're dealing with thousands of devices, is who is looking after it all? Who's responsible for it? Who's, once it's all up and running, who's there to make sure that that you get that data? And of course, finally, I've got to ask, I don't know if it is still on air or not. I don't really want to know, but yeah, it was an awful program. Okay. So we've gone through the data, the sensor types, where we put them, and I'm hoping that this incredibly slow build-up is because if we don't get these bits right, then the information that we're going to be using to inform us and help us make decisions and record the outcomes of those decisions aren't going to be optimal. Yeah. Um, just so that is the key point. So we've got the data. I am you'll be hopefully grateful to know I am not going to even put a sentence in about how do you process, evaluate, and record that data because that's geek world. This bit here is how do we actually start to see it. So the ones we're going to cover, we're just going to cover four, but we're really covering the key players from our understanding in the different sectors. So the one that many of you will know already is Meraki. We would regard Meraki as a vertical product. What we mean by that is that the company that produces the hardware delivers the dashboard. So you get a lovely all-in-one solution. You get your Cisco Meraki access points. The licenses are paid for. You get your login, and there's your dashboard. So you can see your data. It's there for you. And there are a number of others. There's people like Siemens. We were with the Welsh government at the Barcelona Smart Cities Expo a couple of weeks ago, and the place was just full of very large corporates that produce this type of vertical solution. Typically, they're only interested in places like Brussels or Leeds or Edinburgh. I'm not sure that they're within the budgets of Abertavy or yeah. So we've got Meraki, and we'll look at a couple of examples of that there. We've got a much more open solution, open in terms of you can buy different sensors and you can plug them in. It's called Tago.io. You still have to pay for it, but it's much more cost effective and it opens up a lot of opportunities. But it still requires some technical skill, but it's good and it's very, very popular. It's not used much in smart towns. It tends to be used for people looking after elderly relatives, that kind of thing. But it's there, and it's definitely become bigger over the last 3 years. a product that we've used lots over the last 15 years, and sadly we weren't able to use it for Patron because it doesn't support multilingualism very easily, is a product called Grafana. We'll look at that. That's open source. It's free. You can play with it. They've got things built in, loads of documentation. You can run it on your own laptop, or you can run it in the cloud in AWS for pennies a month. It's a fantastic product. We ran an e-commerce monitoring system that would transact millions of pounds a day in orders, and it was all monitored and recorded using Grafana. It's fantastic. And then there's Patron, which is something that we've developed, which we'll cover, which is open. We'll cover it in a bit. So the big differentiator, I think, apart from cost and limitations, is when you use Meraki, you can't add anything else to the mix. Yeah, all you're going to get is the data from Meraki, which predominantly is about network performance and utilization. It's not about location analytics, but the bits that are there, they are there, but that's all you get. The most important thing is you really can't share it. You're going to have to extract it, do a screen grab, put something into a report. It's unshareable. Another aspect is it doesn't store data for very long either. I think it's a maximum of a year. I'm not sure, but that's the limitation. So you can't share automatically. Tego.io, I think the very cheap versions, again, they're just for you and you only. But as you expand and move up their product set, then you are able to create more public dashboards, or even create dashboards for different types of users. So there could be a dashboard for the town council gardeners. There could be a dashboard for something else. You really are able to do that, and it's all very well supported. Grafana is you just do what you want with it. If you've got an AWS and you're just sharing how sunny a place is from a sensor that picks up sunlight, go for it. I'll show you some. And the whole rationale behind Patron was to share. It's open data. The data is there so that we can start to put it in context. So here's Meraki. Here's the Meraki dashboard. And again, it's not going to be a Meraki dashboard session, but what we're looking at here are three metrics that they derive from their access points. The main one that we're interested in is the one called proximity. And what that's telling us is over that period, which was it was the last 2 months, that there are peaks and troughs across the day of passers-by. Passers-by are people who've never really done much with the network. They've never joined it. They're passers-by. They might be only there for 5-10 minutes. They might be driving through, but that's passers-by. Visitors tend to stay longer. Yeah, and they tend to have connected. So you can see there a big difference. So the one that's interesting for us in terms of informing decisions on towns is passers-by. Why was there that peak at some point between July and, well, it looks like the end of, oh, well, there was the peak. There was because, sorry, I know the peak. The two peaks you can see are, unsurprisingly, Easter and the August bank holiday. Yeah, so if I move my mouse there is Easter, and there is your August bank holiday there. If we zoomed into that, it would give us more information. Engagement is the dwell time, how long are people staying? Unsurprisingly, we can see here we've got dwell times where the majority are spending between 5 and 20 minutes, all the way up to 153 spending between 1 and 6 hours. Loyalty is the number of people who come back. We can't do that metric apart from people who log in for GDPR, but it's giving you an idea here of the numbers of people who come back every day into that place, which was Porthaethwy. That's what you get with Cisco Meraki. You can download, you can see up here, the button here, CSV. So you can download that data and put it into a spreadsheet and start to do more with it. Tegio, well, here's an example of Tegio. It looks fantastic. It's mobile friendly. You build your own system. There's a link at the end of the presentation which would let you go there. I've not found any examples of towns that are using, like I said, but I see no technical reason why not, and it's very cost effective. Grafana, open source, it's been around for years. Here's one that keeps the geeks happy, which is for a location, it's the amount of rain, the top graph, and the amazing amount of lightning strikes in that place at that time. That was recorded using a weather station using different methods. But you can see straight away the graphs are clear. You've got a vast range to choose from. Unfortunately for us, it didn't support Welsh fully, which meant we would have had to do two versions for every graph, which was just, it was madness. So that was the only reason that we didn't do that there. Now, there are lots of Grafana Town dashboards. Here's one from Barcelona. My Spanish is appalling, but I know it's all about how loud things are. So you've got three places, you've got three streets, and it's giving you indications using Grafana with contextual information about the level of sound. And this is, as far as they regard it, this is where the quality of life is impacted. And you can see, for instance, in this place, that it isn't impacted. It's rarely at that sound level. And here it's giving us a picture of the sound levels over the course of a day and the average. So this is a really effective way of communicating a simple data metric, sound pressure level. And if one of our, as maybe as community councillors or as local authorities, that we are having complaints from residents about sound levels, whether that's a road or it's people in the evenings, then this is the kind of thing where we can record before and then we can start to look at recording afterwards and look at the impact of any interventions in there. It will be directly visible straight away if it's worked in relation to the dates that after the thing was there. So really can recommend looking at Grafana. It's a fantastic product, and you can play with it. There are so many ways that you can play with it. Patrum, this is our world. It's expanded since that slide was done, so we're in Powys now. So there'll be 40 locations very shortly covered across there. Majority of them are smart towns, but there are beauty spots. What does it look like? Well, it doesn't care what sensors you use. You just need to tell us what they are, and we then support them. The bit I'm wanting to stress here is, so forget the product and look at what we're trying to demonstrate here, is that we've got three different places. We've got a tourist village, we've got a town, and we have a beauty spot. And straight away you can see the peaks and troughs. The different colours represent different dwell times. Dark blue is 5 to 20 minutes, 1 to 2 hours. They match the Cisco metrics. So you can see that this village, again in April, big hit, beginning of the school holidays, or there was something happening there, forgotten. And then we've got the August bank holiday and then the gradual decline down to where it is now. Market Town, basically the patterns of activity are the Sunday things go very quiet. And then a beauty spot where there are no homes or houses and only a couple of businesses. You can see that basically the patterns are weekends and holidays. Everything else is neither there. And what gives it context, what turns it in our mind into information, is because we get people logging in. You can see straight away now that this place, outdoor activity, is the principal visit purpose. We go to Porthaethwy, Menai Bridge, and you can see, although outdoor activity is still there because people go for walks, etc., you can see it's a much more balanced set of activities. And where we go to a tourism village, there are just two principal reasons for visiting that place, which are outdoor and holiday. So here's two different sets of data. One is counting the number of devices in a place and processing that data and visualizing it. And the other is looking at qualitative data about the people that are there and trying to give a picture as to what's there. And yeah, so, and just to look at the same data but across 6 different places, and again, just to bring out there, you can really start to see patterns of activity. So here, for instance, that was the Llangefni festival. So you can see straight away if that was an intervention, if that was something that was an outcome of a decision made by that place, then they now have the data that demonstrates quite clearly. And if we were to zoom in, we would see straight away that, there were, well, it's more than double or double the number of visitors to that town on that day. And we can see all sorts of other metrics about it as well. So it's important. Okay, now how do we work with that data? Because those graphs are great. They're all preformed, they're all there, but we're all asked questions, um, and we need to start linking these things in. So all of those systems, Meraki, Grafana, Tego, Patrum, all allow you to download the data. Now, there's two ways that people typically access data. For the geeks, they use something called an API, and they're pulling data all the time. And all those systems, I think, apart from Cisco Meraki does as well. They all support that. So if you have developers and you want to build something more robust, something that's continual, you can pull that data into your own system and do things with it. And you can do that continually. But as people, we probably download them as something called a CSV file, which is a very primitive spreadsheet. And what happens when we get the spreadsheet is we get something meaningless like this. It's data. So this is an example of an exercise in making decisions using data from sensors. We were tasked um, to look at the activity in smart towns around the Eisteddfod this summer. The Eisteddfod this summer was held in Bodleian in the Llyn, and fortunately for us, we had 4 smart towns already up and running in that area. And what we were tasked to do was to start to see, we had to be GDPR compliant, but during a day, could we see how many devices we'd seen on the Maes in the Eisteddfod, and then could we see them in that town? So was there an impact? Was there a positive impact of this massive cultural event that could be viewed and shared? And the data came back in. And I know our developers were happy with it, but that's it very clean and tried to set up. It really doesn't tell us anything at all. The trick, and it just seems to work every time, is if you can start to use pivot tables, you can turn that very dull set of data into something that starts to be more understandable. And we can start to now look at this data that we've captured from sensors, and we can actually make, I believe, valid inferences. So what we're looking at, we've been able to sum and total the places and the percentage of people that we saw in that in both places on that day, so that we can see, for instance, that at the beginning of the Eisteddfod, the places that were peripheral didn't have in any way a statistically important number of people visiting both sites, but Pwllheli did. So Pwllheli was beginning to see people coming from the Eisteddfod, or they were going to Pwllheli as part of it. What we can, sorry, it's Abbott. I forgot to center the things. It was Nevin. Yes, it's Nevin. So we can see Nevin and Aberdaron. Their numbers are clearly higher than Abersoch and Pwllheli. That's the bit there. And if we look at the key here, we've got Aberdaron, which is blue, and we've got Nevin, which is grey. And you can see here that up to 8% of the devices that we saw on that day in Nevin, we saw on the Eisteddfod. So we've got the numbers as well, but we can now go back to the people who tasked us with this and say there's quite clearly an impact, that the Eisteddfod did provide visitors to those places, and that there were peaks. If we had other data sources available to us, particularly weather, you would see also that was kind of quite a correlation between visitor numbers and the place. So this is what I'm trying to get to, that we've been able to reliably measure 4 places, and we were able to set up something for an event, and we're able to then use that data to come back and help either confirm people's suspicions or change them. But it's actual information. What we were also able to measure was vehicle movements using sensors. This is using a seismology device, and you can see here on the 10th, you can see distinct patterns. So no cameras, no pulsers, no beam breakers. This is just the noise of the vehicles in the ground, and this was the key junction for all the traffic that was going to the Eisteddfods. This is where the council had decided that all the traffic from the south and the north, basically south, east, and north, so basically everywhere apart from Penllyn, was going through this junction, and we were able to measure that data. So to summarize this before we look at the decisions, what are your objectives for your smart town? Everybody has a different set of objectives. It's key. It could be raising footfall. It could be looking at certain periods of the year, certain periods of the day. Could be reducing antisocial behaviour. There are so many different objectives that we keep learning from people. It could be reducing traffic, pollution, various things. So what are the objectives? And once you know that, what data types do you think could support those objectives? What we're saying there is what are relevant. You know, if you're looking at reducing traffic, well, clearly counting traffic, counting particulates, and counting and recording sound levels might all be key metrics that you would want to focus on in order to be able to report back on those objectives. Keep going back to it: location, location, location. If you're monitoring pollution, then where are you putting the sensors? Is it in the right area? Yeah. The next bit is who's the audience? Are you reporting back to the community, to your peers, to consultants? It all guides in how much you want to share that information. But one thing we would say is that our belief is fundamentally that just looking at one place in isolation to others is you're missing the value. If you can see how your place is compared to other places that you might regard as similar, then you're going to be able to provide much more context and your information will be higher quality. And on top of all that, is it feasible? There's not just the technical feasibility and the costs, but it's also, have you got access to the locations? It really is important. And the one that nobody seems to want to look at until it all goes wrong is who's responsible. Yeah, getting it up and running is great, but if it's running over a period of 18 months or 2 years for funding, who looks after those sensors? Who's making sure that the data comes through every day? We're really fortunate working with Mentor Mom because there's like several of us who care, plus the communities. So we're managing to get through it. But we are aware that in other places, things just don't happen. Yeah, everything starts off great, but then the battery runs out. Who changes the battery? Can you get there on a step ladder? There's all sorts of really boring day-to-day bits. And decision making. Now, you'd be glad to know this is the end, or the very near the end. I think on my masters, I did a whole module for 4 months on decision making. Where do we go? Decision making is the human aspect. The only thing I think I can bring to this, I'm sorry if it was, is that you have to set objectives. And we've already discussed that, and I'm sure absolutely every one of you is doing that. So if it's reducing pollution by 10%, increasing visitor numbers in the month of October by 20%, um, parking, making sure that parking's not a problem during summer. Whatever those objectives are, and you're measuring those objectives, then what we're saying here is everything we're doing is there to facilitate you being able to measure the impact of the intervention and also then refine the intervention and measure the impact of that. Um, that's what this is there for. The decision processes that you make regarding that are entirely unique to each location. So I hope that makes sense. You've just got to monitor, what we're talking about is make sure you're recording before your intervention, during, and if it's relevant, after. And the more important bit there is even if you have reduced your pollution by 10%, if you're able to look at yourself in comparison to other places, is 10% good when everybody else reduces theirs by 20? Yeah, that's the key bit there. You've met your objective, but if you're able to measure yourself against your peers, then that will hopefully help improve decision making, because you can find out how did they what were the decisions that underpinned that, and how did they achieve it. So yeah. I've put a few useful links in there. I think there'll be more. The key one there as well, the only one I felt kind of vague to explain was the air quality. So what we work to is the government's. Okay, I think I'm a little bit over, but that's it. Thank you very much.
No, that was fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for pulling that together. Really, really informative session. Um, there is a couple of questions in the chat, but everyone, if you have any more questions, please do either put your hand up or pop them in the chat. So you had a question from Damien. Can you elaborate at all on the traffic seismic
Oh,
sensors,
for
please?
weeks. I mean, Kiki, can you tell? Yeah, we are.
Don't get started.
Please don't get me started. I've got some downstairs if you want to see them. We're working with Manchester and Aberdeen University. It's all came about because we've put one of our systems in it's not a town, it's a small fishing cove on the north of Anglesey, and we use one of the. It's also Anglesey is also a geopark, and of course I got rambling with the person who runs the geopark, and we saw this seismograph thing, and I found it all very exciting. And then we started, and we were just going to record earthquakes as something to show the potential of recording information, to discover that the system can record traffic and footfall. And that's what we've been working with. So we've just finished the experiment with the Eisteddfod. We've learned one big thing, and again, I'm like a scratch record: location, location, location. The two locations where in the very short time span we had, we were able to locate these devices in a size geologists friendly location, came back with gorgeous data. The others didn't. Yeah, so we're using it basically to monitor footfall, and the lovely thing as well, the one thing important bit here, because this is what our next project is with them, is the seismograph recording traffic and footfall. Unlike a camera where it counts the shapes going directly past it, so you've got information for that little place, the seismograph can record up to about 500 meters away. So you get the traffic volumes in that place. So what we're working on now with the academics, we're looking for funding with Connected Catapult, is to build a data model that enables you to integrate the traffic cameras with the Raspberry Shakes, which are the seismographs, so we can give much better quality. All of these are low cost. Nothing. The traffic cameras cost about 160 euros if we amend them the way we're planning to, and the seismographs cost around about £800. So they're fantastic, and of course they start their life in Wales. They do end up in Panama on the side of a volcano for a week, and then they come all the way back to Wales again. So yeah, we've got 6 of those, and I believe the report says, without wanting to preempt things, Kiki, that it did work. Yeah. So did that answer the question?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
that was great. Thank you very much. Sorry. I just wondering if we could perhaps organise to catch up sometime to learn a little bit more about it, Paul, if that's okay with you.
If you've got a spare 6 hours, yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, because I think there's a real value to them. Yeah, because again, privacy compliant, low cost, unobtrusive. The way we want to work with them is for things like where neighbourhoods are wanting to reduce parents travelling to school in the morning and the afternoon.
Yeah, that's something that we'd be looking at, something like that, and also like maybe journeys to a location A, and then how many, what kind of relationship does location A have with location B, where the people are
Well,
going from A to B, or
that's exactly what we want to resolve with the
yeah.
traffic cameras, where you can start to predict flows. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. That sounds like right up our street. So yeah, if we can catch up sometime in the future, that would be absolutely brilliant. Thank you
I'm
very
sure
much.
Kiki will think of that 6 hours less of potential Paul time. So yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Cheers.
No problems.